We are at the Honolulu Marathon in Hawaii in 1978. The marathon runners are setting off and the event is being watched and celebrated as usual. But several people noticed that some runners are wearing rather unusual Nike shoes on their feet, which give the impression of being very light. Little by little, they learned that this Nike is available in 6 different stores in the city. Everyone goes to try them on, is blown away, and the pair is sold out in no time. But what the townspeople didn't know was that they just got their hands on an invention that would forever change the world of sneakers, if not the world of shoes altogether. This invention wasn't the Air Max 1 or the Air Force 1, it was the Air Tailwind, the first shoe in history to feature the famous Air technology, a legendary shoe for its precocity and materials. Hi everyone, it's Arthur Barondi, and today we're starting a series on Nike's most memorable classics, and we start with the Tailwind. Air technology is by far the invention that has most changed the world of sneakers, but also Nike's presence in the landscape. It has been Nike's image for years and continues to be in the modern times, being improved even today. But what many people don't know is that it wasn't invented with Tinker Hatfield's Air Max 1 or Bruce Kilgore's Air Force 1. In truth, the first shoe in history to feature air technology was the Nike Air Tailwind, released in limited quantities in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1978, and for everyone in 1979. But if Tinker Hatfield or Bruce Kilgore weren't at the origin of this first creation, who was? Well, no designer in particular, but above all, a NASA aerospace engineer, Frank Rudy. Nike's headquarters at the time was a hotbed of incredible innovators who were here to help them improve in the sneaker world. There were a lot of designers, pro athletes, and a lot of scientists, but also NASA aerospace engineers like Frank Rudy. The first thing to know is that he didn't invent this technology at Nike headquarters. He approached them after asking Adidas and other brands, which declined his offer, and they're probably regretting it a lot right now. His idea was simple: put a cushion of air in the sole to reduce the impact on the foot, but also to lighten the weight of the shoe. Because as you know, the air has no weight, and of course this made it much lighter. Nike finally accepted his offer, and it was surely one of the best choices in the firm's history, because this shoe was about to become their first revolution. Like all pairs of sneakers at the time, the Air Tailwind was designed purely for performance, since wearing sneakers on the street was nowhere near as regularized as it is today, especially in the late 70s. That's why they decided to opt for a simplistic design, reminiscent of the Cortez, with mesh for the base and suede for the inserts. These already lightweight materials are coupled with the famous revolutionary air sole that was new at the time. The look alone told you that it was lighter than any other sports shoe at the time, and of course that helped a lot Nike's marketing. As mentioned in the introduction, they released the pair at 6 Honolulu retailers in limited quantities, and they quickly sold out, which was quite a feat for the time. They then sold them in many shops in the USA other than Hawaii in 1979, and that's when the real marketing began. They said in their ads that the shoe was addictive for many because of its comfort and its lightness. According to the Nike ads, if you tried it on, you'd never want to switch to another running brand afterwards. They added that it increased the runner's endurance considerably because it was reducing knee and leg fatigue. They sold this shoe as a shoe that was ahead of its time, a real revolution, proving that their long-held credo, always thinking about the future of the sneaker world, was true. For them, it was even a major invention like the Concorde, the supersonic airplane which alas no longer exists today. They were talking about launching the new generation of sneakers with it, and even if at the time it seemed exaggerated, today we realize that it wasn't at all. By the time it came out, the shoe had become the priority purchase of marathon runners and amateur runners, and they were fighting to buy it, to the point where it panicked other brands which rushed to find and develop their own technology to compete as quickly as possible, sensing that they could quickly be left behind. So why has the Air Tailwind disappeared? Well, in truth, we have no idea. How can you release a product, be so successful with it, and then abandon it for no reason? No one really has the answer today, but it finally reappeared in the catalog 10 years later, in 1992. However, it was nothing like the Air Tailwind we knew, and that was a shame. Since the release of the Tailwind, Nike has released legendary shoes like the Air Force 1, the Air Max 1, the Air Max 90, and of course the various Air Jordans. But some were still clamoring for the return of the one that started it all. And their wish was more or less granted in 1992 with the release of the Air Tailwind 92. And as you can see on the picture, it has nothing in common with the OG model released in 1979. Coinciding with the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, its shape, design, and materials had nothing in common with the original model. It featured a visible air bubble and was very reminiscent of the Air Max 180, from which it obviously drew its inspiration. The next models were more closely modeled on the Air Tailwind 92 than the OG, which became the guideline for future Tailwinds. And that was rather illogical since the shoe's name suggested a thin, light silhouette rather than a bulky shoe. So we'll have the Air Max Tailwind 96 released in 1996, which was an even more massive sneaker with a giant air bubble even bigger than the Air Max BW. The Air Max Tailwind 2 released in 1997, which was inspired by the Air Max 97 released the same year, but also by the Reebok Daytona, whose resemblance is quite striking. And finally, the Air Max Tailwind 4 released in 1999, which is the most interesting of the three. What's striking about this pair is that it followed the same path as the shoe it's primarily inspired by, the Air Max Plus or the TN internationally. Indeed, it had the same lines as the Air Max Plus, but was also one of the most expensive sneakers on the market. The air bubble on the heel, however, was inspired by the Air Max 360. Very famous in Australia, it became known for being the most stolen shoe in stores because of its price and became such a street symbol that it was nicknamed the Jailwind. But that's not the only reason it got its nickname. In fact, this shoe was considered the luxury shoe for prisoners who would do anything to get their hands on one of them. Not only was it a much appreciated collector's item, it was also the most comfortable, a very important factor in an environment where you spend your time doing hard community service on the prison premises. After the 4 came the Air Max Tailwind 5 in 2000, which generated a fair amount of interest at the time, but little when they wanted to relaunch it in 2020. The Air Max Tailwind 5 Plus, which became really famous in 2021 thanks to its collaboration with Skepta. And finally, a few collaborations took place for the Air Max Tailwind 4 in 2019 with Supreme, and finally the Tailwind 79. The OG will have 3 different colorways for the Stranger Things promo, but also the re-release of its legendary gray-blue colorway in 2018. So why this pair, released in so many colors and models, is not on a par with an Air Max or an Air Force One? Well, quite simply because the basic concept seems to have been totally abandoned for the dad shoe style of the 90s. The Tailwind 79 has always been and remains the most popular of the Tailwinds because it respects its name, but also has an atypical design and history that sets it apart from the rest. But in the end, from the Air Tailwind 92 onwards, the models became mere alternatives to the various successful Air Maxes that were being released. They were simply inspirations of existing models, with no real innovative or original design behind them. Nobody ever put their own personal stamp on the Tailwinds of the 90s, unlike the OG model, which remains not only the first sneaker in history with air technology, but also a rare item coveted by many sneaker addicts.